Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Kenney Baden. I will be your afternoon host for the next 2 hours. And what a 2 hours it will be, because remember James Scandirito Jr., who was on trial for the murder of his father, that it would be Scandirito Sr., and for abuse of a corpse. Well, the jury had a verdict a while back, and he is going to be sentenced today at 3 o'clock, and we will carry it live on this network. But if you didn't watch this trial, let's listen to whether the jury decided he was a killer or whether he just, and I say just, chopped up his dad. Well, that was James Scandirito Jr. on the stand as a defendant. Still with me to discuss this case is Terry Rosenblatt, who heads the DNA unit of the Legal Aid Society of New York. Just an amazing job, amazing position, knows everything you want to know about DNA. And joining me, and I make no bones about it, is my favorite judge of all time, Judge Brandon Birmingham from Texas. Judge, you are running for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the highest court in Texas. Oh my gosh, you mean we could lose you off the bench, but where we first saw you here on Law and Crime?
I guess so, but I got to tell you, I want to take you with me everywhere I go for that introduction.
Oh, I'll do it all the time. I will even come down to Texas to help you, because we see a lot of judges and never somebody who has controlled the courtroom as well as you. Although, you know, you're in the running. There's somebody in California in the Kellen Winslow case who here at Law and Crime we're saying could be a close second. But let me get off that. I mean, it's just all kidding aside, because this is a serious case. He was convicted, Mr. Scandirito, of chopping up dad, as he calls him, and he said he never used the Sharpie on his dad's body, as if it would be worse than chopping him up. What did you, as a judge who's seen a lot of things, think about his testimony?
Well, you know, I remember of all the ones that we've watched, this one really stuck out with me when I was talking about it with you a few months ago. And we said it was shocking, it was jarring to the conscience, but it also was so shocking that it had the ring of truth to it. And, you know, this was a fascinating case. The judge right now is going to have to decide, you know, what is he going to do? He could go all the way up to 15 years, or he could give him, I guess, some kind of a treatment and some sort of probation. And, you know, this is one of those cases that he probably won't ever forget.
Right, and his niece, who monitored in the courtroom, just gave an extended victim impact statement. Her father was apparently murdered, and the murderer was never found, and she was very, very emotional. You couldn't really understand what she's saying because of the placement of the microphones, but we could just hear the emotion in her voice. So the judge is listening to that. How much of an effect, Judge, when you're sitting there, do you give to victim impact statements?
Well, it is, I believe, inherent in our system that the victim should be heard and their wishes should be taken into account when you are trying to determine what's in the best interest of the defendant and what's in the best interest of society. Carries great weight, and I think it carries great weight with not only judges but also with jurors. So it's something that you have to keep in mind. You also have to keep in mind what is the long-term solution to this problem, and you've got to view these verdicts, these punishment verdicts especially, with that in mind.
And Terry, you said something to me on the break. You said the victim impact was talking about the effect of as if Mr. Scandirito had been found guilty of the homicide, the murder, and you didn't think that was correct. Why?
I don't think that's fair, because you have to separate the two. None of us were there for what happened the night that James Scandirito Sr. died, and so you have to respect the jury's verdict that he did not die because of anything that his son did. And so to have a victim impact statement that's focused on painting Mr. Scandirito Jr. as a murderer is simply unfair. The victim impact statement, certainly they can and should talk about the impact of not having the proper burial, of the things that are related to the crime that Mr. Scandirito Jr. was actually convicted of. But you're mixing the two things if you're having extended victim impact statements, and it's really on the judge to separate those two things and to say that it's the rule of law that controls what the sentence is.
And that's why the goals of that is why we hope we have a great judge like Judge Birmingham who will follow the rule of law. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. So there you heard it. The family wants him to serve the maximum sentence by law, the maximum, which is 15 years. And this is what we were talking about just before we went to break, that indeed there was an objection, Judge Birmingham, to this statement on the basis that it really wasn't a victim impact statement. It was just railing against the defendant and his demeanor at trial. And the judge said he's going to let them do what they want. They're the family, they're victims, but he would only take into account what's legal. That was the correct ruling, wasn't it?
Well, I think that the judge is very mindful of the gravity of the situation. Ms. Rosenblatt brings up a very good point that we are not here on a victim impact statement for a murder case. He was found not guilty of that. And then I also think that this judge is being very mindful of the fact that the family has gone through this very traumatic experience, and he's letting them have their day in court. He is very capable of determining what's relevant for sentencing and what's not relevant for sentencing. It's a lot different than being in front of a jury, where it's really hard to instruct them to follow the rules like we know them to be. And I think the judge is weighing all of those competing interests quite beautifully.
Yeah, and Terry Rosenblatt, again, head of the DNA section of Legal Aid Society of New York, you said exactly, and then all of a sudden there was an objection by the defense attorney, Elizabeth Ramsey, saying this is inappropriate because it's talking about the defendant's demeanor at trial. But his demeanor actually kind of helped him get acquitted, didn't it?
Well, I think that's right. I think the fact that he was very collected in telling his story, and in when parts where emotion was appropriate had emotion, I think made the jury feel that his story was more believable. And so you can't think that all of the players in these cases are totally objective. Of course they're not. These are the family members of someone who died, and there's a reason that we don't have the family members decide the fate of the person who is accused, right. Or there's a reason that family members don't decide the sentence. They have the inability to be objective. That's natural, that's human. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's good that we don't allow them to render a verdict. And so for a victim impact statement to talk about what happened at trial and place value judgments on that when it comes to sentencing is wrong. And it was right for the defense lawyer to object, and it was right for the judge to say, I'm not going to take that into account. Now, it's a question about judges are human beings too, right?
Let me just say, Judge Birmingham, you definitely are a human being. You're a human being, I understand it. Terry hit on that. But, you know, the prior person, that was the niece, that was Ellen. Ellie said something, and let me read it, that he had his defense attorneys assassinate Scandirito Sr., who we're seeing on our TV right now, assassinated, blaming the defense attorneys for the verdict. But the defense attorneys have to present the client's case. As a judge, do you ever blame the defense attorneys if there's an acquittal, or do you think that's the way the system is?
That is absolutely the way the system was created. We have an adversarial system. I love listening to good lawyers. I will protect their ability to fight for their clients until the day that I die, and I will protect, to the best of my ability, the right of the prosecutors to go zealously represent their client as well. And you got to let the chips fall where they may. You've got to focus on facts, the law, and not on emotion. So as long as you can do that, that's what our system is designed to do.
Well, let me ask you this, Terry, because again, we're monitoring the courtroom where Mr. Scandirito will be sentenced, but again, the sound placement is not good, so you're not missing anything, ladies and gentlemen. We're telling you everything that's happening. There were victim witness impact statements. One was objected to. The judge let it happen. But here, this defendant got on the stand, and he had very minute detail. He talked about knocking the hors d'oeuvre server of cocaine over, and that his dad, he kept calling him his dad, was laying in it, and that he had to get rid of the drugs because he didn't want to get charged with it. But he kept saying dad, and then the prosecutor, I noticed, said, I wrote this down, your father. Why was the prosecutor in cross-examination saying your father, and yet Mr. Scandirito kept saying dad?
Well, I think the prosecutor was trying to dehumanize the defendant. I think that the defendant was telling a human story about the real way that he viewed their relationship. That man who died was his dad. The prosecutor doesn't want the jury to think that. The prosecutor wants the jury to think that Mr. Scandirito Jr. was a cold-blooded killer. And so he's not going to use the kind of language that makes it seem like this is a true story of an insane tragedy that happened in a family. They're trying to make it seem like this was something that was different. And I think those language choices were deliberate in that way. It's the same way that prosecutors in court, they almost never call our clients by their name. They call them the defendant. Why don't they call our clients by their name, right? It's because they're trying to dehumanize them. And it's true that a prosecutor has a job to do and they are supposed to zealously represent their cause, but their cause is justice. And they have to take that into account. And so they should treat the defendant and their defense as having humanity.
Terry Roosevelt, you've been a great guest today. I'm going to thank you now because in case we run out of time, because we're coming up to a hard break, but thank you so much for your insights, especially dealing with the Central Park 5 discussion and Jeffrey Deskovic.
Thank you so much for having me, Linda.
And Judge Birmingham, really quickly, because you're going to be staying with me. If you are the judge on this case, do you get swayed by the fact that, you know, he was only convicted of a crime that could be 15 years? Do you get swayed and give him 15 years, or do you look at other factors? Well, we're coming up to a hard break, so.
I would say look at everything all together and make the best decision based on the information you have at that point. I'm sorry, I can't commit to anything like that. You know that.
I know that. I know that. That was what we call a softball question, Judge, because we are coming up to a hard break. We are monitoring the James Scandirito case in Florida. He's going to be sentenced. Stay with us because right now he's in that courtroom and it could happen any second.